But the idea that, okay, first it forced China to create its own internal successful chip industry, and second, the training moved offshore anyway. So it didn't slow down one iota the training, because I think what the government didn't realize is if you embargo ASML machines, then they can't build the fabs, and the fabs are like physically on the turf. You can't just port it to another server overnight. But the training is just a job, and it can move to a server in Hong Kong or to Taiwan or to Europe instantaneously. The file that comes back is just about 3 terabytes, and you just transmit it back in an hour.
Yeah.
And so that moves all over the world like a liquid. It's everywhere instantaneously. So the chip embargo is completely and utterly backfired and misguided.
Yeah, and unfortunately right now, if you talk to the folks in DC, they're doubling down on this, right? Right now, they want to keep adding and making these things more difficult. How can we get the the international data centers that are being used by these Chinese to not be, accessible? And they're adding more and more layers and more KYC.
大家好，这里是华人看世界 CNView 频道。本期节目，我们将把目光投向正在加速改变世界的中美 AI 竞争。通用人工智能究竟还要等5年、10年，还是可能比想象中更快到来？中国为什么积极推动开源模型，而美国却不断加码芯片、算力和数据中心建设？一场看似争夺技术领先的竞赛，背后又是否隐藏着金融泡沫、产业失衡以及全球安全风险？节目中，来自中美两国科技行业的专家将拆解中国 AI 产业的真实节奏，讨论机器人、能源、芯片管制和 AI 治理，也会解释所谓猎鹿博弈究竟意味着什么。更值得关注的是，双方即将展开的 AI 安全对话能否让竞争转向合作？当小型模型也可能具备危险能力？当 AI 产业的估值超过美国 GDP， 我们究竟是在迎接一场技术革命，还是正在把自己推向新的危机？从台湾与台积电到未来的就业、制造业和世界秩序，这场对谈将带我们看清 AI 竞赛最关键也最容易被忽略的另一面。接下来一起进入本期内容。
Of the electricity when you use these high voltage things, and they bring the energy to the east where most of the population is living, right? And but they are also building some data centers right where these the power generation is happening, so that you don't have stranded power, and they're able to deliver compute at a fraction of the cost of the U.S. because their energy cost is around 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Which is in some cases 10 or maybe 15 times cheaper than many parts of the U.S. Right. So, and I think in the long run, that's actually where the constraint will be. And I think you're right. Right now they don't have enough chips. They can't buy enough chips, and they can't make enough chips, right? Because their capacity is limited by the fact that they don't have EUV machines, right? So when I was in China, and every lab I talked to, I said, "Hey, do you guys have no compute?" They're like, "No, this is our biggest issue. We don't have compute." So from a export control, are we slowing down China? Yeah, I think that export controls of chips is slowing down China. Now, the one thing that most people don't realize is that the actual training right now that is happening is not even happening in China because they don't have the Blackwell generation chips in China, right? And so they're actually doing it in international data centers, training it, and then bring back on a disk or something, So it's.
Wait, say that again. That's incredibly important information.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, this is actually not a secret. I mean, I think people in both
this
sides.
This has been widely reported.
Yeah, in both sides.
What's the point of a chip embargo? What is the purpose of an embargo?
Well, I think it's more optics than anything right now. Right.
Oh my God.
Now, but from an inference perspective, most of the inference is being served to Chinese people in China, and that is an area where the limitations of resources is slowing them in terms of how many new users they can add and so forth. And I think you guys alluded to some of that in your prior episodes. So the export controls, yes, it has slowed down China. It's made their life more difficult, but it also has created the necessity for innovation. So back to what Peter was asking earlier, was export controls good or bad? I would tell you this. The day, or maybe like the week after we stopped the Chinese from buying all of the high-end chips from the U.S., I had calls with a few of my friends who are in the semiconductor industry, and every one of them got calls saying, "Hey, would you like calls from the government saying, hey, would you like some extra funding? Would you like extra resources? How can we help you accelerate? Could we get you customers?" And I know a few of the CEOs of these Chinese GPU companies, and they were saying nobody wanted to buy our stuff. We're 2 or 3 generations behind. We were less energy efficient, but now we can't make enough because every data center in China has to buy our stuff. And so we would have died if it wasn't for American policies. So essentially, we created the current competition of all of these, the Morthreads and Cambricons and Birans of China would not be as successful, or maybe would have gone bankrupt if it wasn't because of American policies. And now within the next 2 or 3 years, they will start to catch up to what America is doing, and they will start to export their chips. And that would not have been the case if it wasn't for us forcing them to survive.
Well, what a back-to-back double whammy that is, though. I mean, we knew the chip embargo was misguided, and it's going to be one of many government misguided things in the next couple of years. But the idea that, okay, first it forced China to create its own internal successful chip industry, and second, the training moved offshore anyway. So it didn't slow down one iota the training, because I think what the government didn't realize is if you embargo ASML machines, then they can't build the fabs, and the fabs are like physically on the turf. You can't just port it to another server overnight. But the training is just a job, and it can move to a server in Hong Kong or to Taiwan or to Europe instantaneously. The file that comes back is just about 3 terabytes, and you just transmit it back in an hour.
Yeah.
And so that moves all over the world like a liquid. It's everywhere instantaneously. So the chip embargo is completely and utterly backfired and misguided.
Yeah, and unfortunately right now, if you talk to the folks in DC, they're doubling down on this, right? Right now, they want to keep adding and making these things more difficult. How can we get the foreign, the international data centers that are being used by these Chinese to not be, accessible? And they're adding more and more layers and more KYC. And I think that those are the kind of things that actually will backfire more economically, more geopolitically than economically, because then that forces irrational behaviors. Like shit, they're now trying to keep us from progressing as a nation. Then behavior gets more aggressive and they become more defensive. And I think
Alvin, I think we agree on almost everything except the timeline to AGI. And I really want to get back to Alex's question of, if it turns out that Kimi K3 level or one model later is capable of full RSI and then spirals to the singularity. Just hypothetically in that scenario, Alex's question is, what wake-up call would it take to get back to Xi Jinping to say, oh, wait, I was wrong. It's not 10 or 20 years out. And we've made a horrible mistake here if we release this next thing to the world.
I think if they start their credible multiple labs coming back, safety labs coming back with testing to show that these AI systems have their intent, once they've released, to do things beyond what they were instructed to, right? I mean, you guys have been talking about these rogue AI escapes, but they weren't really rogue AI escape. They were instructed to escape, and they were put into a prison and say, how can you escape this?
They were incentivized to escape, I would say. They were incentivized to go and find the answer.
And they were saying, use whatever tools you have. And by the way, they also had left open doors for these things to escape, and because of improper settings, or maybe some of them were intentionally leaving holes for them to find. And they were given tasks that were impossible to solve unless they escaped, right? So we forced these AIs to do what they were doing, and they're creative systems, right? Because that's what their job is, right? Now, if something went, and if these AI systems started to show that even though you didn't tell them to do these things, then they started to do all these sneaky, subversive things, and they started to hack other systems and create their own, I think something you guys have talked about, using crypto to then grow money to then buy more servers to then grow themselves. If they start to do that, I think the governments on both sides of the ocean would be much more focused in terms of how do we protect ourselves from a runaway AI.
So, Alvin, the White House just put an embargo on Chinese robots. We've talked a lot about robots here. I was surprised. I think it's a move that reduces U.S. competitiveness. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, so the thing is, robots today, 90% of their components are coming from China. Right? If we put an embargo on them, in fact, there was rumors now that was funny that now U.S. robotics companies are now sneaking to China, buying these components, putting them into suitcases, and then bringing them back. Right? They're now sneaking the other way. The Chinese were going around and buying GPUs and sneaking them back. Now the American robots companies are going to China and sneaking back components and actuators that they couldn't get in the U.S. Right? So I think we need to understand that the world is interconnected. We are highly dependent on each other. This has been the globalization concept has been something that's been going on for the last 100 years. And I don't think we can stuff that genie back in the bottle, right? I think it's great that we want to create domestic independence the same way that China has. They spent, the last 10, 15 years, building out their own capabilities, building out energy generation, building out telecom systems so that they wouldn't be dependent on third parties because they've seen how reliant on one or two countries, and when policies change, it could hurt them, right? And so some of the things that we've done really have allowed them to and gave them the motivation to be as strong in terms of taking short-term hits for long-term independence.
We've reported on the fact that there's like 150 humanoid robot companies, and Chinese central government and provinces are really incentivizing robotics. Their robots are appearing on national stages. There's, sports competitions. Can you give us some background? What is the undercurrent of robotics in China? What's the government trying to incentivize? Is it a one-child policy that left them short laborers and they need workforce?
Yeah, so I think we need to separate the kind of bigger automation question from the humanoid robot explosion, right? There is 150, plus. I think when I was at the WAIC, there was over 200 robotics companies that were related to humanoids that was demonstrating stuff, which is.
这期节目真正值得我们带走的，不是某个模型的排名，也不是中美谁能提前几个月抵达所谓的终点，而是一个更根本的问题。当人工智能成为改造经济、社会乃至国际秩序的基础力量时，我们究竟应该用什么样的思维去面对它？整场讨论反复提醒我们，所谓中美人工智能竞赛可能从一开始就被放进了一个并不准确的框架。很多人把它理解成一场有明确终点的零和比赛，仿佛谁先实现 IG， 谁就能永远统治世界，谁在算力、芯片和数据中心上多投入一点，谁就能获得不可逆转的优势。但现实中的技术发展并不像登月竞赛那样成功抵达一次就可以宣布结束，人工智能更像一条不断延伸的道路，模型会持续更新，能力会不断扩散，开源会让更多国家、企业和个人参与进来。这里没有一条清晰的终点线，也没有一个国家能够永远独占未来。这也解释了为什么节目中反复提到猎鹿博弈、囚徒困境，告诉我们，如果双方都认定对方一定会背叛，那么最理性的选择就是抢先加码，最终把彼此拖入军备竞赛。但猎鹿博弈提供了另一种可能，真正有价值的目标需要双方建立信任，共同承担风险，才能一起获得更大的收益。对于 AI 来说，这个更大的目标不只是制造出更强的模型，而是让技术真正进入医疗、教育、制造、能源和科学研究，改善普通人的生活，同时避免失控系统、网络攻击和生物安全风险扩散到全世界。从这个角度看，中美双方其实存在一个经常被忽视的共同利益，没有任何一个大国希望对方的金融系统、电网、通信网络遭到摧毁，也没有任何政府愿意看到不受控制的 AI 被恶意组织利用。国家之间当然存在竞争，制度之间也存在分歧，但竞争并不意味着必须把对方推向崩溃。因为在高度互联的世界里，一个主要经济体出现剧烈动荡，最终承担代价的绝不会只是他自己。节目对开源模型的讨论同样说明了一个事实，封锁并不等于领先，限制芯片、软件和设备出口确实可能在短期内增加对手的成本，却也可能迫使对方加快国产替代，寻找更高效的算法，并通过开放权重模型调动全球开发者的力量。资源不足有时反而会逼出新的创新路径， 相反，拥有巨大算力的一方，也可能因为沉迷于堆叠资本和建设基础设施，而忽视了真正的应用价值、组织效率以及社会承受能力。这就引出了本期另一个重要警示：人工智能产业正在吸引惊人的资金，数据中心、芯片和云服务被不断包装成下一个必然增长的市场。但如果投入速度远远超过真实需求，企业收入无法覆盖资本支出，私人大量举债建设的基础设施就可能变成沉重负担。历史一次次告诉我们，技术本身可能极具价值，但围绕技术形成的估值、杠杆和狂热却未必可靠。真正受益的未必是投入最多的公司，真正决定未来的也未必是参数最大、宣传最响亮的模型。更值得警惕的是，我们可能把注意力过多放在超大模型和遥远的 AISA 上，却忽略了今天已经存在的现实风险。一个规模不大的模型，只要配合合适的工具、数据和自动化流程，就可能被用于网络攻击、生物化学实验或者大规模诈骗。风险不一定与模型大小成正比，关键还在于它如何部署，是否能够自我改进，是否拥有外部工具，以及有没有跨国共享的安全标准。换句话说，真正需要防范的不只是某一天突然出现的超级智能，也包括今天已经能够被低成本复制和滥用的普通模型。在产业和就业层面， AI 带来的冲击也不会简单的表现为机器取代人类，更现实的变化是，许多白领工作会首先被重新组织，企业会用少量高经验员工配合 AI 完成过去需要大量初级员工参与的任务。未来的劳动力可能更多转向护理、教育、养老、医疗和各种需要人与人直接接触的服务行业。问题在于，技术升级本身不会自动完成社会转型，人们需要培训、保障、重新分配机会，也需要让普通人相信效率提升带来的财富不会只集中在少数公司和资本手中。中美之间关于 AI 的差异也不只是模型能力的差异，中国更强调能源、制造、产业落地和大规模应用，美国则更重视前沿模型、芯片优势和技术领先。一个国家可能努力追求最强的模型，另一个国家则更关注如何让足够好用的 AI 进入千行百业。最终的竞争很可能不是谁拥有一个最强大的模型，而是谁能够建立一个更开放、更稳定、更有韧性的生态系统。因此，真正成熟的战略不应该只是不断加速，也不应该是简单封锁。我们需要在关键安全问题上建立热线和共享机制，明确红线，减少误判。需要让不同国家参与共同测试，制定可以相互承认的标准，也需要把 AI 当成公共基础设施来思考，让更多发展中国家能够获得算力、教育和应用资源。只有让技术带来的收益被更多人分享， AI 才不会成为少数国家和企业之间不断升级的危险赌局。至于台湾，台积电以及未来的地缘政治走向，节目给出的启示同样是不要把复杂的历史、民族和政治问题简单归结为芯片争夺。技术是重要因素，却不是全部答案。任何重大冲突都可能摧毁供应链、人才和生产体系，最终让所有参与者付出代价。理解对方的安全感。历史记忆和政策逻辑并不等于认同对方的一切，而是为了让谈判拥有现实基础。归根结底，人工智能正在逼迫人类重新思考国家、资本、劳动和权力之间的关系。我们不能用旧时代的民族国家结构去承载一个瞬间跨越边界的技术系统，也不能让几家公司的商业愿景直接变成全世界的国家战略。未来真正重要的不是谁喊得更响，谁投的钱更多，而是谁能在创新与安全、竞争与合作、效率与公平之间找到可持续的平衡。这场讨论没有给出一个简单答案，但它至少提醒我们， AI 的未来并不是由某个实验室单独决定的，而是由政策制定者、企业、研究人员以及每一个普通使用者共同塑造。面对这场可能改变文明走向的技术变革，我们既不能盲目恐慌，也不能轻率乐观，更不能把所有选择都交给资本和竞争逻辑。欢迎大家在评论区分享，你认为中美应该继续把 AI 当成一场必须分出输赢的竞赛，还是应该建立更多合作机制，一起把这头真正的鹿猎到手？喜欢这期内容，别忘了点赞订阅，继续关注更多精彩视频。